On Christmas, my husband closed off the door and said, "You're not family anymore, get lost." I saw my father giggling behind him, handing my place to my brother. I quietly nodded, stepped back into my car, and sent the voicemail I'd been saving for 12 weeks. Minutes later, everyone stood up and left. Before I tell you how that single moment unraveled everything they thought they controlled, do me a small favor. Support the channel in whatever way feels right. It helps voices like mine reach people who need them. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 37 years old. And for most of my life, I was the easiest person in the room to overlook. Not because I was loud or dramatic or difficult, but because I learned very early how to make myself small. I grew up in Pine Brook, Oregon, in a family that valued harmony over honesty and appearances over truth. My father, Robert Hale, liked to laugh things off. Conflict made him uncomfortable, so he turned cruelty into jokes and called it peacekeeping. My brother, Mark, figured that out early. He learned that if he smiled at the right time and echoed the right opinions, he'd always land on his feet. And me? I learned that speaking up made me the problem. I married Daniel Carter when I was 31. At the time, I thought marrying into his family would finally give me the sense of belonging I'd always chased. Daniel was charming in public, confident, decisive, the kind of man people listen to. When he chose me, I mistook his attention for protection. What I didn't realize was that Daniel didn't want a partner. He wanted a supporting character. At first, the comments were subtle. Little jokes at my expense during dinners. "Emily's sensitive, you know how she is." Or, "She worries too much. I handled important stuff." Everyone would laugh, including my father, who seemed relieved not to be the target for once. I'd force a smile and tell myself I was being dramatic. Christmas was always hosted at Daniel's family home in the Maple Ridge subdivision, a pristine house that smelled like cinnamon, pine, and unspoken tension. Every year, I cooked, wrapped gifts, remembered birthdays, and showed up early to help. Every year I felt less visible. This Christmas was different. For weeks leading up to it, something had shifted. Daniel had grown colder, more dismissive. My father had started making comments about how family sticks together, always said while looking past me, never at me. My brother Mark had moved back to town recently, and suddenly there was no room left for nuance. He was the golden presence again, and I was the inconvenience. Still, when Christmas morning came, I dressed carefully. Neutral colors, soft makeup, nothing that could be called attention-seeking. I wrapped the gifts I'd bought, including the expensive one Daniel insisted we give my brother, and drove to Maple Ridge with that familiar knot in my stomach. I parked on Evergreen Lane a little down the street because the driveway was already full. As I walked up to the front door, I could hear laughter inside. Real laughter. The kind that stops the moment you enter a room. I didn't even make it that far. The door opened just enough to block my path, and Daniel stepped forward, filling the doorway like a wall. His hand pressed flat against the doorframe, casual but deliberate. "You're not family anymore," he said evenly. "Get lost." At first, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. My brain searched for the punchline, the smirk, the signal that this was some twisted joke. It didn't come. Behind him, in full view, I saw my father laughing, actually giggling as he pulled out a chair and gestured for Mark to sit. The chair. My chair. The one I always took. The place card with my name on it was lifted, flipped over, and set aside like clutter. No one stopped it. No one looked uncomfortable. Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping just enough to make it feel private. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Emily. You always do this." "Do what? Exist?" I looked past him again, locking eyes with my father. He didn't look away. He just shrugged, like this was unfortunate but necessary, like I'd brought this on myself. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not numb. Not angry. Just done. I nodded once. Calmly. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I turned around, walked back down the steps, and got into my car. 2 blocks away, I pulled over. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear in a way it had never been before. Because what happened at that door wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the final confirmation of something I'd been avoiding for years. I had never been family to them. I was convenience. I was effort without reward. I was the person you remove when the picture gets crowded. And they had no idea what I'd been preparing. 12 weeks earlier, after a night where Daniel had mocked me in front of his parents and my father laughed along, I started recording things. Not secretly in corners. Just saving what was already being said. Voicemails. Conversations. Offhand remarks people assumed I'd forget. I didn't do it for revenge at first. I did it because I was tired of being told I was imagining things. That voicemail I sent from my car? It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the truth, layered, undeniable, and finally out of my hands. I pressed send. Then I waited. And Christmas was never the same again. The voicemail didn't even take a full minute to send. My phone buzzed once, soft and final, and I set it face down on the passenger seat like I didn't want to watch the fallout happen in real time. But of course I did. I sat there on Evergreen Lane, engine idling, Christmas lights, blinking on houses that suddenly felt very far away from my life, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone lit up. First, a text from Lily Moore, my cousin by marriage, technically, but the only person in that entire web of relatives who had ever treated me like a human being instead of a role. "What did you just send?" I didn't reply. Then another notification. And another. I tilted my rearview mirror just enough to see the front of Daniel's parents' house. The door burst open. Lily came out first. She didn't stroll. She stormed. Coat half on. Phone clutched in her hand. Face flushed with the kind of anger I'd only ever seen her show when someone crossed a hard line. She didn't look back when she hit the driveway. She just kept going. Then Mark appeared, confused, glancing down at his phone. Then back into the house like he was trying to figure out which version of reality he was supposed to stand in. Behind him, Daniel's Aunt Susan stepped out, shaking her head, whispering something sharp over her shoulder. A family friend followed. Then another. People weren't trickling out. They were leaving. Inside the house, voices rose. I couldn't hear words, but I recognized the cadence. Daniel's clipped irritation. My father's nervous laugh, pitched too high. Someone slammed a door. My phone rang. Lily, I answered. "Emily," she said, breathless. "What the hell was that?" "You listened," I said quietly. Of course I listened. Everyone did. She paused, then her voice dropped. "Why didn't you tell me you had all of that?" "Because if I told you, I would have talked myself out of sending it. Instead, I said, I didn't want you caught in the middle." She scoffed. "I've been in the middle my whole life. At least now I know which side I'm standing on." I swallowed. "What's happening in there?" I asked. "Chaos," she said flatly. Daniel tried to say it was taken out of context. Your father laughed until the third clip played. Then he went quiet. Your brother looks like someone just unplugged him. She hesitated. Your husband is furious. I almost laughed at that. Almost. I'm done, I said. Saying it out loud felt different. Solid. Real. I know, Lily said. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. She hung up before I could respond. I stayed parked for a few more minutes, watching the house empty itself of people who suddenly didn't feel comfortable pretending anymore. When I finally drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. When I got home to my townhouse on Redwood Avenue, my phone was already stacked with notifications. Missed calls from Daniel. Texts from Mark. A single message from my father that read, "We need to talk." I ignored all of them. Instead, I made tea, changed into sweatpants, sat on my couch and stared at the wall while my heart caught up to what my spine had already decided. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, the story had grown legs. Daniel left me 6 voicemails between midnight and 7 a.m. They followed a predictable arc: anger, disbelief, blame, bargaining. You embarrassed me. You had no right. You don't understand what you just did. Call me. We can fix this. I deleted them without listening to the last two. The message I'd sent the night before wasn't emotional. It wasn't a rant. It was a compilation. 12 weeks of moments they thought didn't matter. My father joking about how I overreact. Daniel telling his mother I was lucky he put up with me. Mark laughing about how I always play the victim. And finally, a short clip from 3 weeks earlier, where Daniel said, clear as day, she's not really family. She just married in. No commentary. No accusations. Just them. I sent to 8 people. Not everyone. Only the ones who mattered. The ones who had front row seats to the performances and still claimed ignorance. By noon, Lily texted me again. Your dad's asking around for you. Don't answer. I'm not, I replied. Good. Also, Susan wants your number. She said she owes you an apology. That surprised me. The real shock came an hour later. Daniel's mother called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it was something unfamiliar, embarrassment. Emily, she said, I think we should talk. There are things I didn't realize were happening. I'd like to understand your perspective. Perspective. Funny how that word only appears when silence stops working. I didn't call her back. Instead, I called my lawyer. I didn't tell Daniel I was doing it. I didn't need to. I'd already learned what happened when I gave him advance notice. He used it to get ahead of me. The lawyer was calm, efficient, and unsurprised. You're not the first woman to call after a holiday blow-up, she said, but you might be one of the most prepared. That was the thing. This wasn't impulsive. I'd been preparing long before Christmas. Long before the door closed in my face. I'd been untangling finances quietly, separating accounts, making copies of documents. I didn't drain anything. I just made sure I knew exactly where I stood. By the time Daniel showed up at my door 2 days later, I was already 3 steps ahead of him. I didn't open it. Emily, he called through the wood. This is ridiculous. We need to talk like adults. I leaned against the door, not touching the handle. You told me I wasn't family, I said evenly. Adults don't say that and then knock like nothing happened. He went quiet for a moment. Then, softer, I was angry. No, I corrected. You were honest. That's when he lost it. You think you're some kind of hero now, he snapped. You sent a private message to cause a scene. You turned my family against me. I smiled to myself, even though he couldn't see it. I didn't turn anyone against you, I said. I just stopped covering for you. He stood there for another minute, breathing hard, before muttering something under his breath and walking away. That was the last time he came to my door uninvited. The next few days were loud in a quiet way. Messages kept coming. Some apologetic, some defensive, some pretending nothing had happened at all. My father tried again. I don't know why you do this on Christmas, he said in a text. You could have handled it privately. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. I tried private for years. You laughed. He didn't respond. On the 4th day after Christmas, Lily came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat cross-legged on my living room floor, curtains spread out between us, the TV off. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said. It feels weird not to be waiting for the next blow. She nodded. That's what peace feels like at first. Unfamiliar. She hesitated. They're trying to reframe it, saying you're unstable, that you planned this to hurt Daniel. Of course they are. But, she added, it's not landing. Too many people heard too much. That night, I slept for 8 uninterrupted hours. And for the first time since I could remember, I woke up without dread sitting on my chest. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because humiliation doesn't dissolve quietly when it's tasted power for too long. And Daniel was about to prove that. By New Year's week, the silence had curdled into something sharper. Daniel stopped calling. That alone told me more than any apology ever could. When he was silent, it meant he was strategizing. He didn't retreat when he lost control, he regrouped. I found out what he was doing the same way I always did. From someone else. Lily texted me one afternoon while I was working from my laptop, curled up on the couch with a mug that had gone cold hours ago. He's telling people you're unstable. I stared at the words. How? I typed back. Quietly, she replied, which somehow makes it worse. He's framing it like concern, saying you've been under a lot of stress and misinterpreted things. Of course he was. That had always been Daniel's favorite weapon, doubt. He didn't need to deny reality if he could blur it enough that people stopped trusting my version of it. I closed my laptop and leaned my head back against the couch. This was the part of the story where, years ago, I would have panicked, where I would have rushed to explain, to defend, to make myself palatable again. Instead, I opened my notes app and added a new line under a heading I'd titled quietly months ago, "If this escalates." Because I knew him, and I knew this wasn't the end. 2 days later, my father finally called. Not texted, called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Emily," he said, voice heavy, rehearsed. "This has gone far enough." I didn't respond. "You humiliated Daniel," he continued. "You embarrassed the family. People are talking." "Yes," I said calmly. "They finally are." He exhaled sharply. "You could have come to me." I almost laughed. "When?" I asked. "When you laughed behind him while he kicked me out." Silence. "You don't understand," he said finally. "You don't do this kind of thing publicly. Families handle issues privately." I closed my eyes. "Private for you meant I stayed quiet," I said. "Public for me meant I stopped lying." "That voicemail was yours," I interrupted. "Your words. Your laughter." I didn't edit tone. I didn't add context. I just let people hear what I've been hearing for years. He tried a different angle. "Daniel's hurting," he said. "So was I replied. He sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. "You're blowing up your marriage over one moment." I felt something in my chest finally snap cleanly in half. "One moment." I repeated softly. "That door was just the last one." He didn't have an answer for that. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, realizing something that stung more than anger ever had. My father wasn't upset because I'd been hurt. He was upset because I'd disrupted the arrangement. The next escalation came faster than I expected. Daniel filed a formal complaint with his church leadership. I found out when the pastor's wife emailed me, requesting a gentle conversation. I didn't go. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer. She responded within an hour. "Do not attend. This is an attempt to regain narrative control." Good to know I wasn't imagining it. By mid-January, Daniel had moved out of the house we shared. Not because he was done, but because he wanted to look like the one taking space. He left behind things he didn't care about and took things that weren't his. I documented everything. Because the thing about finally standing up for yourself is that people assume you're reckless. I wasn't. I was meticulous. The voicemail fallout continued, quietly but steadily. Family friends who hadn't spoken to me in years started reaching out. Some apologized. Some asked if I was really okay. The question layered with concern and curiosity. I answered the ones that felt genuine. I ignored the ones that felt like surveillance. Then, one afternoon, Lily called me sounding breathless. "He did it," she said. "Did what?" "He posted." My stomach tightened. Daniel didn't post often. When he did, it was calculated. I opened social media and saw it immediately. A long, carefully worded post about betrayal, privacy, and what happens when personal struggles are weaponized. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. The comments filled quickly. Some sympathetic, some vague, some clearly fishing for details. I scrolled slowly, calmly, and then I smiled, because he'd made a mistake. He mentioned the voicemail. Not directly, but enough. He called it edited. That word mattered. I texted Lily. Can you take screenshots? Already did. Perfect. Within an hour, Aunt Susan commented. I listened to the voicemail in full. Nothing was edited. Those were your words. Another comment followed. And mine. Then another. People began speaking up. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Daniel deleted the post before sunset. But screenshots don't disappear. That night, he sent me a message I hadn't expected. Not angry. Not defensive. Just tired. I never thought you'd do this, he wrote. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then typed back. I never thought you'd close a door in my face and laugh. He didn't reply. The next week, I got served divorce papers. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how relieved I felt. No more limbo. No more waiting for the next humiliation, disguised as humor. Just a process. A clean legal process. Daniel thought filing first would make him look strong. What it actually did was give me structure. And structure is something I'm very good with. We met once, briefly, in the lawyer's office. He didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. His lawyer spoke. Mine responded. Everything was calm, professional, almost boring. Daniel finally glanced up when my lawyer mentioned the recordings. They're relevant, she said evenly, given the context of emotional abuse. He stiffened. That was the first time I saw fear crack through his confidence. After the meeting, he stopped trying to control the story. He couldn't. People had already seen behind the curtain. My father stopped calling. Mark sent one awkward text that read, I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't reply. I wasn't collecting apologies anymore. I was collecting peace. By February, my life looked unrecognizable in the best way. I redecorated the house, donated things that carried bad memories, changed routines, built new ones. I laughed more, slept better, spoke less carefully, and then, just when I thought the worst was behind me, Christmas came back around in an unexpected way. Not as a holiday, as leverage. Daniel's family was planning a reunion dinner without me, and someone decided to extend an invitation anyway. Not to reconcile, to test. The message read, we think it would be mature to put things aside and be together again. I stared at it, then forwarded it to Lily. Her response was immediate. They're trying to see if you'll shrink. I smiled. I'm not coming, I replied. But they're about to understand why. Because I hadn't sent my final message yet. And this time it wouldn't be private. It would be undeniable. By the time that message landed in my inbox, the one dressed up as maturity and togetherness, I finally understood something that had taken me most of my adult life to learn. People who benefit from your silence will always call your boundaries cruelty. They weren't inviting me back because they missed me. They were inviting me back to see if the hierarchy still worked. To see if I'd apologize for making them uncomfortable. To see if I'd step back into the role they'd rehearsed for me. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer and asked one simple question. Is there any reason I should keep protecting people who didn't protect me? Her reply came 20 minutes later. No, and you're well within your rights to stop. So I did. What most people didn't know, what Daniel especially didn't know, was that the voicemail I sent on Christmas wasn't the only thing I'd saved. It was just the cleanest. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the observer, the person who remembered exact words, exact tones, exact moments people later denied ever happened. I didn't record everything. That would have made me paranoid. But I recorded enough. Enough patterns. Enough proof. Enough context. And when Daniel tried to quietly reassemble his image by hosting a family reunion without me, something in me clicked into place. They weren't moving on. They were regrouping. So I decided to stop playing defense. I didn't blast anything publicly. I didn't post a dramatic expose. I didn't tag names or throw accusations. I did something far more effective. I told the truth, calmly to the people who mattered. I reached out individually. To Daniel's aunt, who had left Christmas early and never looked back. To Lily's parents, who had always felt something was off, but never pushed. To 2 family friends who had privately apologized to me after hearing the voicemail. I didn't ask for sides. I didn't demand loyalty. I simply said, if anyone asks why I'm not there, this is why, and shared a few additional clips, never more than 30 seconds each. No insults, no edits, just moments. Daniel rolling his eyes when I spoke. My father laughing when I tried to explain myself. My brother joking about how Emily always overreacts. By the end of that week, the reunion dinner quietly disappeared from the calendar. No explanation, no apology, just gone. And then the call started. Not from Daniel, from my father. He showed up at my door one Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, holding a bag of groceries like it was some kind of peace offering. I didn't let him in right away. We stood there in the hallway, awkward and exposed. I didn't know, he said. I leaned against the doorframe. You did. He flinched. I didn't know it was that bad, he corrected. I sighed. You knew enough to laugh. That hurt him. I could see it, but I was done cushioning truths. He shifted his weight. Your mother's furious. I'm not surprised. She says you turned people against her. I laughed, a real laugh this time. Short and sharp. No. I stopped turning myself against me. He looked down at the bag in his hands. You didn't have to make it public. I didn't, I said. I made it audible. He had nothing to say to that. When he left, he took the groceries with him. That night, Daniel sent one final message. Not angry, not pleading, cold. You've made it clear you don't want reconciliation. I'll see you in court. I replied with a single sentence. Only where it's necessary. And I meant it. The divorce proceedings were uneventful, which told me everything. Daniel didn't fight hard. He didn't push narratives. He didn't try to paint me as unstable again, because somewhere between Christmas and February, he realized something had shifted. People were watching him now, listening. The quiet woman he dismissed had stopped protecting him, and without my silence, his charm didn't land the same way. By early spring, the house was officially mine. He moved out fully. No dramatic last stand. No final confrontation. Just boxes and silence. And with that silence came clarity. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd normalized being minimized for so long. The answer wasn't complicated. I'd been trained to smooth edges, trained to absorb discomfort, trained to believe love meant endurance. Unlearning that took time, but it was worth it. One afternoon in April, Lily and I sat on my back porch with coffee, watching the light filter through the trees. You're different, she said. I hope so, I replied. No, she smiled. I mean, you're quieter, but stronger. I nodded. I stopped explaining myself. She raised her mug. That'll do it. By summer, the family had fractured into something honest. Not healed, honest. Some people stayed loyal to my father and Daniel. Some quietly drifted away. Some reached out with apologies that felt sincere. I accepted the ones that didn't ask me to forget. Mark sent one final message that said, I wish I'd said something sooner. I never answered. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. And then Christmas came again, a full year later. This time, there was no invitation, no confrontation, no closed door. I spent it with people who didn't require me to shrink to belong. We cooked. We laughed. We talked openly. And for the first time in my life, I didn't brace myself for the end of the night. I just existed. But there was one last thing I needed to do. One last message I needed to send. Not to punish, not to expose, but to close the loop. I left a voicemail, not saved for weeks, not rehearsed, just honest. To my father, I hope one day you understand that silence is a choice, I said. And you chose it every time it mattered. I'm done paying the price for that. Take care. Then I deleted his number. And finally, I let go. Because the truth is, losing a family hurts. But losing yourself hurts more. And I'd already survived that once. I wasn't going to do it again. By the time spring turned into summer, the noise had finally died down. No more texts pretending nothing happened. No more just checking in messages that were really fishing lines. No more subtle pressure to forgive, forget, and fold myself back into the shape that made everyone else comfortable. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. That's when I realized something important. The worst part hadn't been being locked out on Christmas night. It hadn't been watching my husband stand in the doorway and say, "You're not family anymore," like he was evicting an inconvenience instead of a wife. The worst part had been how long I stayed after learning exactly where I stood. I thought back to that night more often than I expected. The cold air, the way my breath fogged the windshield when I sat in the car afterward. My hands shaking as I hit play on that voicemail, the one I'd recorded 12 weeks earlier during a quiet Tuesday when I finally understood the pattern. That voicemail wasn't angry. That's what scared them the most. It was calm, clear, unemotional. It listed dates, exact words, moments they thought no one noticed. It wasn't an attack. It was a mirror. And mirrors terrify people who survive on denial. After the divorce paperwork was finalized, my lawyer slid the folder across the table and said, "You were more prepared than most people who've been planning for years." I smiled faintly. "I didn't plan to leave," I said. "I planned to survive." She nodded like she understood the difference. Daniel never tried to confront me in person. Not once. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he told people I'd changed and become vindictive. I didn't correct him. People who needed to believe that story weren't people I needed in my life. Instead, I focused on rebuilding things I'd quietly abandoned while trying to keep the peace. I repainted the house, not the neutral colors he liked, but deep blues and warm earth tones that made me feel grounded. I rearranged the furniture so the space felt like it belonged to me, not to some imaginary audience. I started waking up early again, not out of anxiety, but because I actually wanted my mornings back. One afternoon, while cleaning out the last box from the garage, I found an old holiday card I'd written to Daniel years ago. It said, "Thank you for choosing me." I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore it in half and threw it away. Because the truth was he hadn't chosen me. He'd chosen comfort, control, familiar dynamics that rewarded him without ever challenging him. And I'd mistaken tolerance for love. That wouldn't happen again. Maya visited one weekend and helped me finish setting up the spare room. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You know," she said, "they really thought you'd come crawling back." I laughed softly. "I know. Your father told me your husband said she'll cool off." I shook my head. I didn't cool off. I woke up. Maya's smile faded into something serious. "I'm proud of you." That hit harder than anything else. Because for most of my life, praise had been conditional, offered only when I stayed quiet or agreeable or useful. This was different. This was earned. As summer passed, I started getting messages from people I barely knew. Friends of friends, co-workers of relatives, strangers who had heard what happened and recognized their own lives and pieces of it. One message stuck with me. "I watched my sister get treated the way you were treated. I never said anything. Your story made me realize I should have." I replied simply, "Say it now." Because it's never too late to stop being silent. Around early fall, my father sent a final email. No blame, no excuses, just this. "I didn't protect you when I should have. I understand if you never forgive me." I read it once. Then I archived it. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him, and reconciliation wasn't something I needed. Healing doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like distance without guilt. That Christmas, a year after everything fell apart, I spent the day hiking with friends and cooking dinner in my own kitchen. No tension. No performances. No one watching to see if I'd behave correctly. At midnight, as snow started falling softly outside, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the floor by the window. And I felt something I'd never felt before on a holiday. Peace. Not relief. Not numbness. Peace. Because I hadn't won anything. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had simply stopped participating in a story where I was always the villain or the afterthought. And that was enough. If you've made it this far, let me say this clearly, especially if this story feels uncomfortably familiar. Being family should never require you to erase yourself. Love should never demand silence. And anyone who locks you out, emotionally or literally, has already told you where you stand. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't knocking harder. It's walking away, calmly, quietly, and choosing yourself without apology. And if my story meant something to you, do me one small favor before you go. Support voices like mine by subscribing, sharing, and letting people know where you're watching from. It helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Because none of us are as alone as we're made to feel. And we don't have to stay silent anymore.